We have a thread here. This is from Alec Karakatsantis. This is a short one. I like to show Alec's threads. If you're not familiar with him, go give him a follow at Equality Alec. Fantastic follow on Twitter. He's constantly breaking down how the media engages in propaganda. And this is actually a thread where he's suggesting questions that media should ask of police departments instead of the kind of nonsense that they sort of, where they regurgitate the talking points of police. These are the questions that should be asked of police chiefs and mayors and spokespeople for police departments. He says it would be interesting for any journalist or city council member in any city to ask the following questions to any police chief in any city. Why do you choose not to arrest bosses for wage theft, but you choose to arrest poor people for shoplifting? That's a very good question. Who are the top 10 highest paid cops in the city, including overtime? Do you think this overtime pay is a good use of taxpayer money? We talked earlier about the framing, not saying taxpayer money. This is an instance where it actually does apply. He's talking about city budgets, not federal budgets. So just to give that quick caveat. But this would be very interesting. And I also want to point out something that Alec has pointed out a lot before. That is, you would be stunned how many PR people are employed by especially large police departments, right? And how much money these departments spend on narrative control and ensuring that their budget is never threatened by left activists who want to defund them. Which surveillance technology are you employing that has not been publicly disclosed to the city council? Once again, a wonderful question that almost nobody would ever even think to ask of a police chief. Why do you choose to arrest people for drug possession as the plurality of your arrests? Very good question. Very good question. They also don't seem to give two shits about the companies that profiteer off of the addiction crisis and the opioid epidemic. They instead go after the victims of that epidemic. Another excellent question there from Alec. Why do you choose not to investigate and arrest people who own polluting businesses for illegal dumping of chemicals in violation of state law? Once again, a great question. And if I could add to that one, why do you often, this might be particular to location, but why do you choose to, brutalize and arrest protesters of companies that engage in the illegal dumping and destruction of the planet? If state law criminalizes abortion and then criminalizes contraception and then criminalizes sodomy, do you intend to have your officers cage people for that? Once again, wonderful question. We could add, of course, to that if the Supreme Court decided to overturn a Bergefell or, any of the other, Loving, the one that we talked about earlier. Would you choose to enforce that? Of course, that would put any police chief on the spot. There are many other questions that should be asked of cops that never will be. Instead, the media plays stenographer for these departments. And that is part of the reason that we have such a cartoonish view of police in this country on the by and large. I also think cop dramas, you guys, I know I've talked about this before, but I think cop dramas are like just one of the most harmful forms of entertainment that our society has to offer, where they go out of their way to show you what great people these detectives are. And, the ones that get me are when there's a plot line where the cops are violating policy or maybe even the law, but they're good guys, so you let it slide. I mean, think about the mentality that pounds into people's heads, right? Yeah, this reporter might be saying a cop did something wrong, but it's a cop. It's a cop. Shouldn't we trust him? And again, I think Uvalde is going to be a turning point in public perception of police, because the fallback when we criticize them for the misconduct and the brutalization of, in particular, racial minorities and how they treat protests and how many murders they have compared to other countries. When we criticize them for this kind of stuff, the deflection is always, well, what are you going to do about violent crime, huh? Who are you going to call when someone pulls a knife on you, huh? It's always these like ridiculous absolutist questions that are designed to deflect and make you think that the cops are necessary. And again, I want to point out, they're not good at preventing or solving violent crime. In fact, they're quite bad at it. They're a waste of resources if your goal is actually to go after violent crime. Alec had cited a number before that most departments are in the 3 to 4% range in terms of what resources they allocate to violent crime. They pretty openly do not give a flying fuck about violent crime. And again, I'll say, go check what's the rate of murders that they solve. What's the rate of rapes that they solve. When it comes to actual violent crime, they are terrible at preventing and solving them. So even the deflection that most people tend to go to that comes from the sort of the cop dramas and all that kind of propaganda that we get through pop culture, and the more direct and insidious propaganda that Alec often talks about coming from the legacy media outlets, most often the New York Times, but also the LA Times, and is it the San Francisco Chronicle or whatever the name of the paper out in San Francisco is that keeps publishing a bunch of nonsensical drivel about the recall of Sasha Boudin, and all these papers, major papers all across the fucking country engage in this stuff. So that mentality is pounded into our heads. And I think, again, it's one of the most nefarious forms of entertainment that we have to offer. Great thread from Alec, and I encourage anybody who's in a position to ask a police chief a question to ask them one of those. Hey, why do you go after poor people for theft, but you don't go after bosses for wage theft? Hey, why don't you go after giant chemical corporations for illegal dumping that very plainly violate state and or federal laws? Why don't you go after them? They'll have no answer for that. Why do you engage in so much asset forfeiture that you're taking more shit than burglars are? They won't have an answer for that. I'd also love to be able to ask the Uvalde cops a question or two. And again, I'm hopeful that that particular instance, as tragic and horrible as it was, will present a turning point in terms of the public perception of police and the role that they play in our society.